So before we look at how to find percentages using the multiplication method, I wanted to quickly first talk about how to write simple percentages as fractions. So for number 1a, if I want to write 25% as a fraction, I could first write that as 25 over 100, which means out of 100 squares, 25 of these squares are shaded in. Now this equals to the same as a quarter, because if I divide both my numerator and denominator by 25, then this would give me 1 over 4, which is a quarter. So when we are looking for 25% of any number, we can write our 25% as 25 over 100 times 64, or we could simply write our 25 over 100 in its simplest form, which is 1 over 4, and multiply this by 64. If I multiply 1 by 64, that gives me 64, and my denominator will be 4. If I use my 4 to divide all through, both 64 and 4 appear in the 4 times table. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 6 divided by 4 is 1 with a remainder of 2, so I put my 2 onto the 4. 24 divided by 4 is 6. So that gives 16. For number 2a, if I want to write 50% as a fraction, I could write that as 50 over 100, which means that 50 boxes out of 100 would be shaded. Now, as we can see, that represents a half of the whole box being shaded. So again, if I simplify my 50 by cancelling zeros and then dividing both the numerator and denominator by 5, that will give me 1 in my numerator and 2 in my denominator, which is a half. So whenever we are calculating 50% of any amount, instead of writing my 50 as 50 over 100, I could write it as 1/2 and multiply it by the number whose percentage I am looking for, and in this case it is 64. So multiplying through, this would be 64 over 2, and I could just now divide 64 by 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that gives me 32 as 50% of 64. For 3a, if I want to write 75% as a fraction, I could write this as 75 over 100, which means that 75 boxes out of 100 are shaded. If I simplify this with 25, 75 divided by 25 is 3, and 100 divided by 25 is 4. So 75% is equivalent to 3/4. Now, if I ever want to find 75% of a number using the multiplication method, I could write 75% as 3/4 and multiply it by the number. So I'm going to multiply 3/4 by 64, and I'm going to put this as a denominator of 1. So 3 times 64 in my numerator, and I've got 4 times 1 in my denominator. Before I multiply this out, I'm going to check for common factors in my numerator and denominator. And because I've got 64 and 4, I could simplify these by dividing by 4, because these both appear in the 4 times table. 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 64 divided by 4 is 16. So in my numerator now, I just have 3 times 16. I could put this in a column method to work it out. So 6 times 3 is 18, and 3 times 1 plus the 1 gives me 48. So 3 times 16 is 48, and that is 75% of 64. To find the percentage of an amount, we are first going to write the percentage as a fraction. So 15% can be written as 15 over 100. Of means we are multiplying, and 450 is what the amount is. So 15% of 450. So what we are going to do is first we are going to put my 450 over 1, and now we are going to multiply the numerators. So to do this easily, I can just first multiply my 15 by 45, and I'm going to put this into a column method. So 15 times 45. 5 times 5 is 25, carry my 2, 5 times 1 is 5, add 2 gives me 7. I then put a placeholder and I multiply my 4 by 5, which gives me 20, carry my 2, and 4 times 1 is 4, add the 2 gives me 6. When I add this up, it gives me 675. So if 15 times 45 is 675, then for 15 times 450, I simply put that extra 0 onto the end of my answer. So it gives me 6,750. 100 times 1 is 100. So my denominator will be 100. Now I can cancel out one of the zeros in the numerator with the denominator, and this now becomes 675 over 10. Now we know that this also means 675 divided by 10, and we know that when we divide numbers by 10, the decimal point moves to the left. So my answer is therefore going to be 67.5. For number 2, 60% as a fraction is 60 over 100, and we are looking for 60% of 3,000. First, I'm going to multiply 60 by 3,000. 6 multiplied by 3 is 18, and because I have got 1, 2, 3, and 4 zeros in the question, I add 4 zeros at the back of 18, so that becomes 180,000. My 3,000 is over 1, so when I multiply my numerators, I'm getting 180,000, and in my denominator, 100 times 1 is 100. And now I can simplify this by cancelling zeros. 1 0 in the numerator and denominator there, and another one there. So my answer for this question is 1,800. So to find 35% of 560, I'm going to write this as 35 over 100 times 560. So first I'm going to multiply out my 35 and 560. So first I'm just going to write 35 times 56 into column method. 5 times 6 is 30, carry 3. 3 times 6 is 18, plus my 3 gives me 21. I'm going to put my placeholder, and 5 times 5 is 25, carry my 2. 5 times 3 is 15, add 2, gives me 17. And when I add that up, I get 1,960. That means 35 times 560 is going to be that answer with an added 0 at the end. So 19,600. And my denominator will be 100. So I can simplify this by cancelling zeros. So 1 there with the numerator and denominator, and a second one there. And my answer is therefore 196. For number 4, we are going to write this as 28 over 100 times 840. So I'm first going to multiply 28 times 840. So I'm going to write 28 and 84 into column method. 8 times 4 is 32. 4 times 2 is 8. Add 3 gives me 11. I'm going to put a placeholder and then do 8 times 8, which is 64. And 8 times 2 is 16. Add my 6 gives me 22. And when I add this up, my answer is 2,352, but because this was not 84 and 840 in my initial question, I'm going to add that extra 0 at the end. So in the numerator, I have 23,520 over 100. So I can cancel 1 0 to simplify this, and I can now rewrite this as 2,352 over 10. Which means we are dividing the numerator by 10. And we know that when we are dividing by 10, that means we need to move our decimal place to the left 1 time. So my answer will therefore be 235.2. So this is a worded question that says, if 15% of a group of students are in chess club and there are 80 students in total, how many students are there in chess club? So we have 80 students and 15% of them are in chess club, which means we are going to have to find 15% of the 80 students. I'm first going to write 15% as a fraction and multiply it by 80. So in order to do this, I'm first going to multiply 15 by 8. So 5 times 8 is 40. I carry my 4. And 1 times 8 is 8. Add the 4 gives me 12. So 15 times 8 is 120, which means 15 times 80 will be 1,200 because I'm adding that extra 0 there. And my denominator will be 100. Now I could simplify this by cancelling my zeros there and there, giving me a final answer of 12, which means 12 students are attending the chess club. In this question, 25% of the students are in the art club, 40% of the students are in drama club. If 10% of the students are in both clubs, what percentage of students are not in either club? So we have to remember altogether, the students in the whole school account for 100%. Now out of this 100%, we have 25 students in art club, 40 in drama and 10% in both. So 25% of the students are in art club, 40% are in drama and 10% are in both, which means we have a small percentage here that accounts for the students that are not in either club. So in order to work that percentage out, first we are going to add these ones up. So 25 plus 40 gives us 65. 65 plus 10 gives us 75. And in order to find the percentage that we need, we are going to do 100 take away 75, and that gives us 25. So 25% of the students are in neither of the clubs. So in this word problem, it says in a school there are 80 teachers. At lunchtime, they all choose to drink either water, orange juice or squash. So we've got 80 teachers. They have 3 options for drinks, which is water, orange juice or squash. If 15% choose water, so I'm going to put 15% there. 25% choose orange juice, so I will put 25% under orange juice. We need to find out how many teachers choose each drink. So we need to find the number of teachers that have each drink. So in order to do this, first we're going to find out how many teachers choose water, and to do that we are going to look for 15% of 80. Putting this as a fraction, I have 15 over 100 times 80. So I'm going to multiply 15 by 8. 5 times 8 gives me 40. 8 times 1 is 8 plus the 4 gives me 12. So that was 15 times 8, but because we've got 15 times 80, we are going to add that extra 0 at the end of my answer, which makes it 1,200, and my denominator will be 100. I can now simplify this by cancelling out zeros. So my final answer is 12. And those are the number of teachers that chose water, so I can put that into my water option. To find how many teachers chose orange juice, we are going to work out 25% of 80. Now 25% as a fraction is simply a quarter, so I'm going to write that as a quarter times 80, and 80 has a denominator of 1. So multiplying through, I have 1 times 80, which is 80, and 4 times 1, which is 4. And dividing through by 4, because 4 is the highest common factor, I will get 20. And 20 is the number of teachers that chose orange juice. Now to find the number of teachers that chose squash, I'm going to take away from 80 the number of teachers that chose water and orange juice, which is 12 and 20. So first working out 12 plus 20, that gives me 32. And 80 take away 32 gives me 48. Therefore, the number of teachers that chose squash is 48. And now we have all my final numbers for how many teachers chose each drink. So here we've got a few practice questions for you to try. So please feel free to pause the video and have a go, and then come back to have a look at the solutions. So number 1 says calculate 95% of 240. So we're first going to write 95% as a fraction, 95 over 100, and multiply it by 240. In order to do that, we're first going to put 95 times 24 into column method. 5 times 4 is 20. 9 times 4 is 36 plus 2 makes 38. I'm going to put a placeholder. 2 times 5 is 10. 9 times 2 is 18 and plus 1 makes 19. And when we add that up, that gives us 2,280. So because this was 240, it was 10 times bigger. So I'm going to make my answer 10 times bigger by adding an extra 0 at the end. So that becomes 22,800 and denominator will be 100. I can now simplify this by cancelling zeros in my numerator and denominator, and that gives us a final answer of 228. Number 2, what is 74% of 400? So first we are going to write 74% as a fraction, which will be 74 over 100, and we're going to multiply it by 400. So we're first going to work out 74 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16, and 7 times 4 is 28 plus 1 makes 29. So my answer for 74 times 400 will be 100 times bigger than 296. So that makes it 29,600. We've added the extra 2 zeros at the end of the answer, and the denominator will be 100. We can simplify this by cancelling zeros in the numerator and denominator, and this gives us a final answer of 296. Number 3 says, in a survey conducted among 200 people, 40% preferred tea, 30% preferred coffee, and the rest preferred neither tea nor coffee. How many people preferred neither tea nor coffee? So we are looking for the percentage of people that do not like tea or coffee. And in order to do that, first we're going to add the percentage that like tea and coffee, which is 40% for tea and 30% for my coffee, which means 70% of the people like tea and coffee. So to find the percentage that do not like tea or coffee, we're going to take this away from 100, which gives us 30%. So 70% people like tea and coffee, but it's the 30% of people who do not like tea and coffee, and that's what we're looking for. So we're going to look for 30% of the 200 people, and we're going to write 30% as a fraction and multiply it by 200. 3 times 2 is 6, and because we have 3 zeros in my question, we're going to make my answer 1,000 times bigger, so that becomes 6,000, and my denominator will be 100. And we can simplify this by cancelling zeros in the numerator with the denominator, and that gives us 60. So 60 people out of the 200 do not like tea or coffee.